We've seen all the leaders, we've seen all the cards, we've seen everything about Star Wars Unlimited Set 5, Legends of the Force. What's left to do? Oh, make decks. Yeah. HARK! We are here. It is time for my first deck for Set 5 Legends of the Force. I know a bunch of people have been putting out decks. I wanted to take a little bit more time with what I was coming up with. Most of my decks have actually ended up being red-yellow. I have this deck that I'm going to present to you today, which is Kestis red, but I've also got an updated version of the Cad Bane Tarkin Town deck that deals with a lot of the Nihil stuff. Maybe we'll go over that later in another video, but today I'm going to showcase to you my current build, plus maybe some potential changes for Kestis red. No epic base, anything like that, just the regular 28 health Force base, because I think this has a lot of legs. It has the ability to take people off what they think is going to happen, and you can swing for a ton of damage. I have played a handful of games with this, and I can kind of see where things are going to go in what matchups. We're going to check this out today and showcase to you the way that I have built this so far with some input from Banana Crapshoot from Saga, and also Chaos Theory, one of the individuals that I recognize over on the Covenant Discord. So join me as we go over Kestis, the leader that I'm probably going to end up playing regardless of what happens with anything in Set 5, and play him with red. So here it is in all its glory. Link to this in the description below. There might be some changes going on through. There will be some things I talk about later about things you could add to this deck, things you could rearrange to be a little bit more beneficial to you. But right now, this is what I have been running. Kestis is your leader, obviously. I'll describe what the exhaust is for in the future, and then I will describe on what your traditional combo is that you're trying to get to by that 4 resource flip to be able to do a lot of damage with Cal. 28 health when red. When a friendly force unit attacks the forces with you base, you can use the 25 health red one. If you deal 3 damage to your opponent's base to be able to get the force. I think the 3 health and the force restriction is going to be a little bit better for this deck than 25 health and 3 damage restriction. We've got 3 copies of Daring Raid. It's your traditional 1-cost pinger. It's shock. 2 damage to a unit, 2 damage to your opponent's base. Force Throw, best force event in the entire game, 3 copies of that. You get to use it where you can discard one of your high costs to destroy your opponent's unit, or you can force them to strip a card from their hand. That may also strip a unit that you might be targeting with that. Qian Flurry, one of the better cards in this deck because it is that +1 cost to a force unit to ambush it and also avoid 2 damage. There's some combos here that are also quite good when it comes to utilizing something like that. 2 copies of Hot Shot, 3 copies of that Flurry. Hot Shot, everybody knows how Hot Shot works. It's a great card. 3 copies of Adi Gallia, one of your early 2-cost force units. By having that event restriction on there and dealing damage to your opponent's base, it's also going to allow you to continue pressuring your opponent to be able to put that damage onto their base. We are using the pilot Anakin, not specifically for piloting, although that is available to you with his own interceptor and the Millennium Falcon in the deck. Ideally, we just need the 2-cost force unit on the ground. You can use the 1-cost Anakin, but I like this a little bit better because it has a little bit of a bigger body, and it can potentially do more damage with some of the things you have later on. Anakin's interceptor over the Green Squadron A-Wing. Choose what you want. I feel that if you end up having enough damage onto your base, this is actually going to allow you to win the game, whereas the A-Wing doesn't do enough damage on the crackback. Plus, it's also a Jedi, and it kind of fits the theme of throwing Anakins in here. We have 3 copies of the Youngling Padawan, which is very important because it's another one of those turn 1 2-cost drop a force unit down, but it also gives you the opportunity to get the force, so you can do that with specific things, your combos that you're looking for your round 1, round 2, 2-cost, 3-cost plays. 3 copies of Sneak Attack. This is going to be one of the better cards in the deck. It allows you to do very important things with Quinlan Voss, Asajj Ventress, and Mace Windu. 3 copies of Surprise Strike. Obvious card is obvious. 3 copies of Ezra here, so now we're starting into the 3 costs of getting our stuff onto the board. All of our 3 costs are actually 3/4s, which is very good, and then Ezra allows you to get some extra interesting things depending on what you want to do when he completes the attack, if he survives. 3 copies of the Falcon. 3 power in space that comes in ready can help you do a lot of damage. You don't necessarily have to pay the upkeep to keep it going, but if you're not using all 4 of your resources on the 4 resource flip, consider keeping the Falcon on the board. Vernestra Rowe, another one of your combo combo pieces, 3/4 for 3 cost, but can come into play ready, and it's very easy for you to access getting the Force with your early Force stuff and also the Youngling Padawan. We have 3 copies of Quinlan Voss here, one of the key components of the deck, because he can very easily, if he survives, push out 8-9 damage into his attacks with being able to get some interesting stuff going forward with his on-attack ability of being able to do the 2 damage to the base if he has 6 power or more. Then we have Asajj Ventress, one of our 5 cost units in here, 3 copies of her. When played and on attack, give another friendly Force unit +2/+0. This is an incredible ability, not an immediate effect, but a half immediate effect, because you can play her, put the bonus on one of your Force units, and then attack with that if it survives. If not, do it with a different one on the next round. 2 copies of Plo Koon. It does give you that ambush if you have your units on the board. Sometimes your units do survive long enough that you can get that extra coordinate raid 3 on there, but if you don't, it's still a Force unit that ambushes as a 3/6 that gets you the Force on that attack. Same thing with Depa Billaba. We've got 2 copies of her at 6 cost. Ambush Saboteur allows you to knock out a Sentinel or knock out shields on something that you need to get rid of the shields for. Bypasses the Sentinels when she's just on the ground when you're not ambushing her. Then 2 copies of Mace Windu. Don't remember the subtitle for this. The 6 cost, 6/6, overwhelm when played, use the Force, deal 4 damage to a ground unit. 2 copies of each of these last 3 units here, specifically because we're not actually focusing on what they do, and more often than not, these will end up getting resourced in the early game, but if you end up being able to utilize one of these, they can win you the game, especially in that 5 and 6 when your opponent's not necessarily expecting the ambush from these 2, or you sneak attacking in Mace Windu a turn early and being able to just wreck face with as much damage and as much removal as that can present. Our sideboard are 2 copies of Bamboozle for upgrade removal, 3 copies of Breaking In if you need the Saboteurs and the additional events to be able to get that +2, 2 copies of Fireball if your opponent has early game things you need to get rid of in space, and 3 copies of Spare the Target. This can be Waylay, whatever, it doesn't really matter, to be able to knock those units back to your opponent's hand and be able to really control the field in that aspect. I've fucked with the numbers on this a little bit. This is kind of what I've set up, but there are still a couple of other options and opportunities available to you with this deck. I am just most comfortable with this because by the time 4 and 5 rolls around, I can end up putting anywhere between 18 to 25 damage on my opponent's base, especially if you're able to get your turn 4 combo of sneak attacking Asajj Ventress in, which provides 5 damage from her when played, which adds +2 to another unit, and then her attack, which would add +2 to another unit if you have that on the board. The high end in 20 is definitely a perfect play, but even just having the Youngling and Cal on the board, sneak attacking Ventress in, giving the Youngling +2, attacking, giving Cal +2, that ends up giving you 5, 10, you could put 14-ish on the board there with that. I had an additional unit on the board from the 3 turn that was able to do that much higher damage break. But ideally, in the early game, you're looking for 2 units specifically. You're looking for the Youngling Padawan and Vernestra Rowe. The combo of those 2 together gives you the biggest opportunity to be able to use Vernestra Rowe's coming into play ready effect with the Force, but also Cal's action at the very beginning of the turn if you have the initiative to be able to do things like that. So if your opening hand is Youngling Padawan, Vernestra Rowe, and 4 cards, you can very easily round 1 play the Padawan, take the initiative when your opponent does whatever they do, unless they take the initiative, in which case obviously that doesn't work out, but they don't have a unit on the board to disrupt you, so you can do whatever. But if your opponent does play a unit, round 2, if you have the initiative, you can immediately activate Cal's ability to exhaust that unit because it's the only unit they can choose on their side of the board that is ready in order to be able to exhaust it, and then your opponent doesn't have any forward moving attacking plays to do stuff. Then you can attack with the Youngling to bring in Vernestra Rowe, and then Vernestra Rowe can attack to get the Force back. So you can potentially spend the Force, use the Force multiple times in a single turn, much like what Avar Chris wants to do, but you're doing it in a way that's generating that advantage of knocking out your opponent's actions, swinging that tempo into your advantage, and also being able to get that extra damage in, because theoretically you can pull 5 damage off on that round 2 3 resource play, while your opponent may not necessarily have any damage on your base whatsoever. If you can combo that into being able to have your Youngling and your Vernestra Rowe on the board and sneak attacking Ventress in, flipping Cal is going to present 4 threats on your side of the board that your opponent is not going to have as many resources to be able to try to block. Now this is where Sentinels come in, and your opponent could absolutely mess you up with that Sentinel stuff. But your initial strategy that you're looking for are the Youngling and Vernestra row. Bearing that, you need at least one force unit to start and another force unit on your 3 to be able to keep those force, use the force, gain the force strategies coming in to be able to do lots of interesting things. Now, you will notice there are no lightsabers in this build. I was hoping that the Night Saber, the red lightsaber, or the yellow lightsaber would have been usable for Cal Kestis. Unfortunately, the yellow saber is villainy, and the red saber, it says Jedi only. So while you do have the Youngling, Padawan, Vernestra row, Quinlan Voss, Asajj Ventress, Plo Koon, Depa Billaba, and Mace Windu as Jedi that can use them, you also do have enough units like Anakin and Ezra and Cal himself that can't use it, and you want to generate that extra advantage being able to use stuff that either gives you a permanent buff like the Hot Shot or a temporary buff like Surprise Strike, and then your sideboard, the Breaking In, or even Asajj Ventress. But a combo of being able to have Quinlan Voss on 4 and Asajj Ventress on 5 allows you to do some very interesting things, or even just Quinlan Voss on 4 and attacking with Hot Shot Blaster on Quinlan or the Surprise Strike on Quinlan. There are lots of different ways of being able to use Quinlan's extra damage to be able to present that. Again, we're looking at 8 or 9 damage depending on which buff you're getting. If you're only getting the 2, it's going to be 8 damage, but if you're getting the full 3 from Surprise Strike, it's going to be 9 damage, 2 also from Ventress. Very good deck, very good strategy. Xian Flurry allows you to be able to ambush into things and take things out. If you want to pay 4 for your Ezra, if you want to pay 3 for your Anakin, 5 for your Quinlan, 6 for your Asajj, those do end up being a little bit higher and more difficult value propositions. But if you do go to 7, which hopefully you don't, because you are probably going to get pummeled pretty hard if your opponent is able to stabilize, mid-range eats this deck in half, which is absolutely insane. I've never been beaten by a deck as fast as mid-range has beaten this deck. But you know, you can't counter every strategy, right? But if you can get to 7 and Xian Flurry with Mace Windu into something and you have the force, that's just a nasty combo of being able to do a bunch of damage to a unit. If it survives, overwhelm into it to be able to do that extra damage to your opponent's base, or use Mace Windu's when played to eat 1 unit, overwhelm the other unit, and take out 2 units for the price of 1 of yours. Lots of interesting things to be able to do. I will warn you right now, do not keep a hand where your only 2 cost is Anakin's Interceptor, because you will lose, you will never have the force, and you will never be able to get that extra benefit of being able to use Cal's exhausting ability to present threats to your opponent. Cal's ability is not going to be used every single turn, but on specific instances where you can stop your opponent's really big first thing, if that's the only ready unit, you absolutely want to use that and make sure you have the force to be able to do that. Or if your opponent's prepping something that's going to be big, you can try to slow them down a little bit by exhausting whatever's on their board that they might need for the strategy. And it can also potentially stop you from dying. If your opponent has multiple ready things, you exhaust one of them down, even if it's the lowest thing, you can still potentially survive the game if you don't take the full breadth of damage that you would have otherwise. So lots of important stuff in here. It's a very interesting puzzle of like hyper aggression in the way that Kaz was hyper aggression without being as high rolly as Kaz did. You are gonna need some specific cards in your hand. You do need a 2-drop force user, 3-drop something, whether it's Ezra or Vernestra, to be able to continue that train. But there's a lot of really interesting stuff that you can do with that to be able to prevent your opponent from beating the absolute hell out of you. That was the main deck and the ideas and the combos. You kind of get everything as it goes. It is an aggro deck. You can potentially switch into combo or mid-range with yours, but I think that Cal is very well served by trying to get the kill in by resource 5 or resource 6. But there are a couple of alternates that you can throw in that might help you do other things depending on what you need specifically for the deck. So we've got 4 cards we're going to take a look at here that allow you to do things differently if necessary. First up, we have BD1, Beep, Boo, Boo, Bleep. We know what he does. 1 cost, 1/3, Cunning, Heroism, Hidden. When played, choose another friendly unit. While this unit is in play, the chosen unit gets +1/+0 on Saboteur. So much like Breaking In, this allows you to get that Saboteur in to be able to knock out those Sentinels, or bypass the Sentinels completely. If you are suffering against Sentinels, this is in your local meta, this is likely going to be a card you're going to want to put into your main board board, not even the sideboard, and try to fix your numbers a little bit to make sure that you have this ability. Just remember, this is not going to replace your turn 1, round 1, 2 resource play. You still need that force unit in the 2 resource play in order to be able to do stuff. But if you have your Cal available, flip on 4, BD1 allows you to give something +1/+0 and Saboteur, and it can't be attacked that round, so you don't have to worry about that clapback. You just have to worry about the other types of removal that could throw BD1. But if you're dealing 3 damage to this, if you're bouncing it, if you're removing it, you're paying X amount of resources to remove a 1 resource thing. Sure, that potentially could protect the Sentinel, but you're using a piece of removal on this that would have been used on something else. So this is available. Well, what can you do with the other 3 resources in your turn? Well, we still have Vanessa Rowe, we still have Ezra, we still have the Falcon, we still have a combination of different events like Daring Raid, the Force Throw, and the Surprise Strike, Shein Flurry, whatever the case may be. But you could also opt for Constructed Lightsaber. In the preview for this, I was down on it. I still kind of am. But a 3-cost lightsaber that is aspectless, you don't have to worry about whatever deck it goes into. You don't have to worry about whichever unit it goes onto. You just attach it to a force unit, and like we said, outside of the vehicles and now outside of BD1, all of your units are force. You're going to get +2/+3 on your unit, and then you have the Restore 2 on your heroism units. So if this goes on to Cal, if this goes on to Ezra, if this goes on to Anakin, if this goes on to your Padawan, you're going to be getting that Restore 2 on it. But if it goes on to your Quinlan Voss, who by the way gets his activated when attack ability by using the Constructed Lightsaber, or your Asajj Ventress, they are now Sentinels, which can also really give you a little bit of a benefit if your opponent is also hyper aggressive at attacking into you. Just be careful if they have their own Saboteurs. But I think this might actually be an interesting inclusion to this deck. You probably would trade out the hot shots for something like this, so you lose the ability to attack, but you do gain a little bit more benefit in the same amount of resources that you would play otherwise. But remember, the hot shot is also red, so you can play just 1 to put it on your unit from your hand and then attack in that next action if you have the ability to do so. Let's say your opponent's claimed, you still have an open resource and an open attack. You could really change the scope of the game with that. Same thing could be said for this. But depending on what you need, what you have available to you, this could be useful in the flip turn with BD1 and throwing this onto your Cal to get that extra damage and restore to heal off the damage that your opponent has dealt. In terms of using the Force, we do have Ki-Adi-Mundi, 4-cost, 4/4. When played, use the Force, draw 2 cards. This deck is going to run out of cards pretty quickly. If you are worried about that, on your 4 turn, you can potentially do this. You're not going to be getting as much aggro out of it to be able to do that. So you might want to wait until you're 5 to do that, especially if you have the Shein Flurry and you can have this ambush in to be able to do stuff. Theoretically, you could ambush, get your force back, then use the force on this to be able to use the force, or vice versa if you already have the force. So lots of interesting things that are available to you to do stuff when it comes to Ki-Adi-Mundi available to you. I would just say probably don't do this on your flip turn unless you're desperately needing the cards on hand. But it's a decent card, could be a sideboard tech if you need those extra cards, if you're finding your games are going much further than you would want them to go. And then last but not least, we have Ahsoka Tano here, our 4-cost Cunning unit, yellow, 3/5. When played, an opponent discards a card from their hand. If it's a unit, you could exhaust a unit. It helps with the exhaust strategy. It helps with the discard cards from your opponent's strategy. If you're going a little bit more towards hand discarding, you're also probably going a little bit more towards the mid-range for this type of deck, using just more aggressive strategies to do so. So like light mid-range almost. I think some people would technically call that tempo, which could be. Tempo is kind of a nebulous term though, so we're going to call it light mid-range instead. This is a good card that allows you to do some interesting stuff. It's a force unit that can continue attacking to be able to get that force back for you, and there's lots of interesting things you can do with forcing your opponent to discard cards, and if they only have units in their hand, you get to exhaust a unit. You may exhaust a unit. It really all just depends on what's available to you and what you want to do. But I think the 2 biggest cards to add in if you're trying to do something a little bit different, if you're trying to bypass those Sentinels, if you're trying to get yourself in a position where you have more power on board, BD1 and Constructed Lightsaber are probably going to be your best bets. I'm going to be fishing for these stupid lightsabers myself, just because I know it's going to be necessary to get them and at least have them available for testing. I haven't tested any of these cards yet, but I think the strategy there is sound enough that you may be able to do so in your own testing with this stuff, because the Galactic Championships are coming and we do need to be prepared. So there you have it, just a quick video, quick-ish video going over the Cal deck that I personally am likely going to be building. Like I said, I've done some testing with it. I've had a moderate amount of success against decks that aren't shoot your units down mid-range style decks. I have beaten a couple of control decks. I've definitely beaten an aggro deck or two. I've beaten the mirror in this, where my deck I felt was built a little bit better with some of the stuff going on, but they were all fun games. And actually, I hadn't had as much fun. The first game I got absolutely annihilated mid-range, and it put me into a real big funk. But when I started winning some of the other games, I realized, okay, there are some matchups you're going to lose. I still think mid-range is going to be the absolute terror to this specific deck, because there's only so much you're going to be able to do against it. But in terms of going up against control, you are an aggro deck as long as you manage your attacks very easily and you can get that, push that damage through to your opponent, and you do have very big swings to be able to do that with. You're likely going to be able to beat the control decks. And I think this is a step faster than your traditional Sabine deck. It's not as, it is technically as wide, but it's not as like combo attacky in terms of being able to attack with more than one unit, or get a big unit out to attack with. So you do have to worry about things like big space units, clearing out your ground units, not being able to stop the space damage. This is definitely a deck of just be faster than your opponent, because you're likely not going to be able to take out big things like bigger ships or big ground units unless you have the ability to just remove them with your force throw or sideboard and your spare the target to be able to bounce those back to your opponent's hand. Just be wary of the resources and the actions you're using. Use your exhaust to your advantage with Cal Kestis to be able to stop that. And remember, your flip turn, you can do it twice. Once on the leader side, once on the unit side when he attacks. And I've done that before, much to my opponent's chagrin, in those types of games. It's a very interesting deck. I like it a lot. I've tested it enough that I think, regardless of what other decks I might come up against, unless something just blows it out of the water, like all of a sudden Kanan is just the king of everything, I think Cal is the one I want to focus the most on, because it does fit my aggro style a lot better than some of the other decks that I have played, regardless of how good those other decks are. So there you have it. That's the list. Link in the description below to the list. I'll throw in, I don't know if I'm going to be able to throw these other cards in there, but you'll have this video for reference. Let me know what you think of the deck down below. Like this video, comment down below that previous thing that I stated, but also what you think might be useful in this deck. We can collaboratively build this together, because it is something I am going to take to the Galactic Championship event, should I be able to get all the cards together, but it's going to be for those side events, for the constructed aspect, Premiere, things like that, maybe even against a couple of developers, rather than the actual main event itself, because, as I've said before, I'm not participating in the main event. I'm going there to play Star Wars cards, hang out with friends, hang out with the other creators, and just try to have a good time at Vegas, because it is one of the larger events I will have attended outside of one almost 2,000 person YCS I attended when I was like 13. But there we go. That's it. That's all I've got. Subscribe to the Star Wars Unlimited channel for all of your Star Wars Unlimited needs. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for letting me ramble about this deck that I've done a minor amount, but enough testing to think it actually might have some legs. That's all I have. I'll try to bring another deck to you all in the next week or so. Maybe throw some random stuff out to see what's available for us in decks. Beware the Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think green Obi-Wan Kenobi might be a lot stronger than most people are thinking. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for joining me. Appreciate each and every one of you, and I'll see you in the stars.